Homebrew is awesome. When I first started playing 3.5e and like this cold garage, and at the peak of winter, with some of my closest friends from high school, I think my brain chemistry got forever changed. I'm sure the magic would have been the same regardless. If we were or would have played in a module released by Wizards of the Coast. Um, but the magic and the mystique, I think, of like a homebrew setting, of knowing that it's a world that's continuously evolving, that's being made by my friend. Uh, I think that was what kind of sold me on it. Like this can and it could have just been me in my first time playing as a character, uh, and then just realizing that I love Dungeons and Dragons. But the magic and the mystique of the game we played was amplified because it was our adventure in my friend's world. I still remember for us playing for like 12 hours straight as our DM was lying on the ground, exhausted, giving us prices for items while I'm fucking gleefully scribbling down on my character sheet and asking him, "What about this?" "Oh, yeah, I'll buy that." And him just begging us to leave. I remember those sessions. It's sad that we don't get to have those anymore, but it's the nature of being an adult. D&D to me was and still is like an empty plate, and the world story and the PCs are the main dish. Like any chef, what you put on the plate is up to you. Some meals come out great. Others will be enjoyed by the dogs or maybe the trash. But in the moment, you really don't know. You're just in the process and you're happy that you're making something and you want to go give it to your friends and enjoy it, which, fair enough. That's a very great experience. But it'll affect you later on in a way that you don't really realize or anticipate. As a meal probably shouldn't be ingested in such cases. You don't really find out later until an hour or so. And then, you get the side effects of eating a bad meal. And for this metaphor, when you kill a player on accident, or they just become jaded to risk because their new subclass you found online turns them into a literal god and they're immune to all damage. You're on my lap. Disclaimer, I think a mistake is only something that you regret. After all, troubled circumstances lead to the best stories, right? A lot of the time, you probably shouldn't have given an item to that person, but it could also make or break somebody's story for D&D. A lot of people and a lot of players connect or resonate a lot with gaining items in the game because it's a like they're actually progressing in the world and they get like this material attachment and then therefore gain attachment to the world. So it could be it could be just a tool for you to get your players engaged, but sometimes you do have to tweak and sometimes changes are made. I think anytime you're doing something with homebrew, as a disclaimer, you should always have an open dialogue with your players. That should be the first and foremost rule. If you take nothing else from this video, always have a discussion saying, "Hey, I made this. We might have to tweak this." You know what I mean? Have the in-lore reason for them gaining the item still valid, and have let them keep the item, but just let them know that you might need to tweak it on the fly. And I think having that understanding with your player can go a long way. That also really depends on your group, but I think a conversation, as with most things in adult life, can resolve most circumstances. So let's get on to the list. Rule number 2, if we're counting the first one. Don't increase hit dice or give outright damage to classes or items. And if you do, disclaimer, I don't recommend it, but if you do, make sure to take the average damage or health that a class already has. Just make sure you keep it in line with it, just for the sake of balance. Especially in the 5th edition for 2014, you really don't want to. The more +1 items you give, and the more hit dice you give, often shift the balance ever in the player's favors, and that's how you get into like really unbalanced encounters where they steamroll stuff. Not that it's really hard to balance encounters. I think the challenge that people have with like making combat encounters in D&D comes from a fear of killing players, which I personally don't have. But yes, I think for the second rule, don't increase hit die or give outright damage to classes or items. It's a bad rule of thumb. You're going to either regret it or someone's going to get heavily injured or hurt, and it might kill a player. Mainly, it's going to kill somebody. Third rule: don't give natural resistances to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing automatically to subclasses or backgrounds. Try not to do this, especially for a background. If this is like something that anybody can pick, why wouldn't they pick that? You know what I mean? I know there's narrative reasons, and this also comes down with a conversation to your players. But this ties into a rule that we're going to talk about later. Players are naturally, especially the min-maxers, are going to look at a subclass or a background and see that it's just better than everything else. Why would they not pick that? Ask this one question. Would this be something that everyone would auto-select because it's leagues better than anything else? This kind of ties into with my other rule as well, where the second one, to not give outright damage and or resistances, because it's really hard to pass away from those, especially in backgrounds. So just really try to stay away from giving them willy-nilly. If it makes sense for a narrative reason, that's fine. Try to make it work. But also let players know that this is a very hyper-specific background for this certain situation. Rule number 4. In your quest to challenge your players, you're going to wish that you could inflict great harm on them. PCs, of course. I strongly urge you to stay away from effects that just outright kill them. Not only does it just break the immersion, if you have like this as a common occurrence, they're not going to be interested. Death and or the threat of death is common in adventuring. I think deadly combat should be more so rare and should signify like a shift in the story or a pivotal moment. This is true. But I don't think that there is a difference between fighting and dying versus you're dead. That's not fun. That's just taking away somebody's 2 hours that they have left in the session, and they're just going to sit there on their phone all night. Don't do that. It's not fun. It's not cool. They're just going to be like, I cheated. Even if, like, power word kill is its own kind of thing. So that's different. That's a spell, and it only works for the real squishies or if they're really low. But generally, you will be using that in combat. Rule number 5. Do not surprise players with new homebrew rules. I mentioned this in my prelude. I think the quicker that you tell your players that this campaign has homebrew elements or that you will be adding homebrew to a campaign, the better. Preferably, you would start it before the game begins, especially when it comes to rule changes. Like if you're going to be modifying a rest system, or if you are going to be doing a gritty survival campaign where the players only get a rest every 7 days, there should be a conversation that is going to happen before anyone starts playing, before people make characters, because that also nerfs casters heavy. But they need to know before they start choosing their classes, rolling dice, figuring out their characters. So that is any homebrew should be discussed at session 0 and brought to the table as early as possible. It should not be okay. So here's my dexterity save. I rolled a 17. Actually, you auto fail. In my setting, wisdom saves are just natural fails. Oh, I really would have wished you would have told me that earlier. That's great. When did this happen? Oh, I just decided it. You can see the disconnect. That's a hyperbolic example, but you understand. If you are giving immunities and or resistances, make it make sense. Not every creature that you run can be immune to silvery barbs and all types of damage. I know your players are very strong, and they are going to find out a way to put your creature in a bubble and send it to the stratosphere. However, the party, at the end of the day, is the main characters. They need to win. They need to feel a sense of victory. Like, this is their journey of getting stronger. This is their story. They're Legolas. They are adventurers. They are the party that saves the day. At least they should be. So they should feel good when defeating monsters. As much as we want to beat the ever-loving hide off of our players sometimes with monsters, we should also remember that everybody's here to have fun, right? Especially your players. So keep that in mind. It's especially not fun as a player when they roll for damage and you're just like, yeah, they're immune to that. That charm thing, yeah, as a bard, when they try to charm an enemy and you're like, not working. If every enemy does that and they're playing a bard, you're really just shutting them out of the game. So keep that in mind. What your party dynamic is. Do you have a good reason for it? Does this creature make sense? Like, can they not hear? If they can't hear and the bard is trying to persuade them, not going to work, right? That makes sense. But if your bard is trying to seduce the dragon, and you're like, no, I'm not even going to let you try. It's just not going to happen. Go ahead and start rolling for some death saves. At the very least, if it doesn't make sense for the creature to have an immunity and or resistance, don't give it to them. Just flat out. It is fun for players to learn and discover immunities and resistances in combat. It's part of the game. It's part of that grindy, that very gamey element to the roleplay that we all come and try to play with. But just because a mechanic that is bothering you with a player is happening, it does not give you an excuse to just make all of your characters and or creatures and or obstacles immune to that set ability. At that moment, I think that is a conversation where it's like, if you're having to just gimp one mechanic or one player at the table or a certain thing because like you hate it, just say no. Just go say, hey, I don't really like this ability. Just have a conversation with them. This ties in back to like the original footnote of this video. If it's something that's bothering you that much, just have a conversation with them. 9 times out of 10, most instances or strife can be solved with a conversation, especially with players. You guys are showing up weekly and or monthly and or whatever your schedule is with the game. I'm sure that you guys can get along long enough to come to some sort of agreement. This goes into our last rule. Keep any homebrew thematic to the world that you are in. Which I think a lot of people, it can be easily done. I know DM prepping can take some time depending on what kind of campaign you run, especially if you're doing like a very roleplay heavy campaign. There's a lot of characters to make. There's a lot of maps to go through, a lot of scenarios to do. And even if you're not and you're doing like a classic high fantasy setting like I am, you can still find it challenging to prep. And carving away that time does, hurt. So when you find stuff online, just make sure that it makes sense for your world. And in the same way where like we're altering subclasses and making new items, same too should be for anything that we pull from online. If you're pulling something from the ether of and the reaches of the internet, it's not hard to modify a stat block. Just take it, wiggle a little bit, erase the name, put a new name on, make sure that the average hit die makes sense, Make sure that the HP, like they can actually, deal some damage. Make sure that they can actually get killed by your players and not cause a 5 hour long combat for a enemy that you thought would take 2 minutes to kill. Exaggeration, but you get my statement. And that also just ties in with if you're running a high fantasy setting, if you're gonna make homebrew for a high fantasy setting, make it make sense. If high fantasy weapon settings campaigns generally don't have fucking laser rifles from Fallout New Vegas. They generally don't have a big iron on my hip, which I think there is a challenge when players want to play artificers, and there's exceptions that can be made, and you can work around that. But generally, make sure that anything that you are making for your world makes sense for your world. Especially when you want to do devious things to your players. The allure and the greed that might consume you when making items might cause you to make some bad decisions. In summation, I most certainly have missed some key rules. I don't claim to be all-knowing, and this list is by no means exhaustive. I'm sure there are plenty of dungeons masters out there with way more experience than me. But what this aims to do is arm you with caution, which I think is the most important rule when you're as same for lifting weights as it is with making stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. Oddly enough, those two interconnect. It's meant to be a fun playground. Dungeons and Dragons is meant to be a fun playground for any kind of story. That also means rules change table to table, campaign to campaign. What can fly in one might not fly in the other. Session Zero's keen. What works in a high fantasy setting might not work in a sci-fi setting, and so forth. Or a film noir detective campaign. And that's okay. That's the beauty of this game. It's just a matter of tweaking. As long as you stay close to the guidelines that I've laid out, generally, the issues that you come up with should be rather minor and resolved with a conversation, as most things tend to be. Hey, my name has been Arrogant Beggar. I will see you guys later. Get out there, create something, and remember those rules.